Chairman, for holding this hearing. It's, and the ranking member, this is very important. I represent the 8th District in New Jersey, which got Hoboken and some of the other areas, Jersey City, which got hit very hard by Sandy. And if I learned anything about our infrastructure, it's how unprepared we were for a storm or anything else. And there's plenty of blame to go around. Everybody always points to the federal government, but in reality, the states could do a lot of things, and the locals could do a lot of things, and the power companies could do a lot of things. I always think of the example, and I gave this once before to the chairman, this example. There was a generator in a flood zone, and the power company was protecting it with a chain link fence. So when it flooded, obviously, the chain link fence did not hold the water back. So what I'm trying to get at is these are the kind of simple things that we can do to protect, this particular transformer. The other thing was in terms of the gas station. You were talking about it now that we learned. I mean, we have plenty of gas, quite frankly, but they couldn't pump it. So a simple thing like a small generator to just move the pump or move the gas from the containers to the people, I mean, would suffice. So when I say to you that everybody shares a blame in this, I just hope that we have come from Sandy far enough to learn some of these mistakes, and we are correcting them. So, Honorable Fogel, would you please tell me that we have come a long way from where we were?
We've come a long ways. We haven't gone far enough. And I think, Congressman, you point out what I see is the real challenge, and which cyber highlights. The tendency is to plan for what we are used to dealing with, not what can happen. And so, again, as you point out, we put a fence around a generator in a flood zone. Well, the reason you have a generator is the power goes out. One of the likely causes for power outages, though, would be a coastal storm. But you hadn't had one in a long time. So you're more concerned about somebody breaking in and damaging the transformer. And that's the trap we fall into. And I think this is what the chairman is raising. Cyber's new. A lot of things we're going to do won't be new in response to the consequences, but if we don't know what we're planning against, we may run the risk of only planning for what we have been used to having, maybe short-term power outages, maybe disruptions that are strictly local, and not plan for what could happen and plan against it. And unfortunately, as you point out, we try to promote these lessons, but it seems to, again, be one of our challenges. How do you get people to change? Well, let's talk about gas stations. That's a private entity. Putting in a generator is a cost. Most people say, well, you can just ship a generator there. Doesn't work that well because most of those utilities were underground, and it was hard to get a generator hooked up to it. So in some states that have dealt with this, they put in incentives that gas stations would be required through regulation to put in a transfer switch. It was a good compromise. That way, if they did lose power for long periods of time, we could get generators in there, hook it up, and pump gas. But this is where we got to be very careful. It's easy to say this is the fix until you ask who's paying for it. And I think this is the trade-off of what would make sense either through incentives, tax credits, regulatory oversight to get these changes, because I can't ask a business to lose money if their other partners or competitors aren't doing the same thing. And on the same time, the response was, you got to put a generator in every gas station. That's not also necessarily a great idea either, but putting in a transfer switch was a good compromise. So again, I think as we learn these lessons, we go back to this trap of we plan for what we have experienced in the past, and that does not always scale up for the future impacts. We've got the lessons learned, we put the information out there, but the receptiveness of that audience is oftentimes based upon, do they perceive this threat as applying to them? And as you know, for your community, we talk about hurricanes and hurricane evacuations, and most people said, we don't have hurricanes, we have northeasters. So it's getting people for planning. In many cases, we know what these impacts are, but it's really the challenge of getting people to plan for what can happen, not what they are prepared to do based upon only their past experiences. And as the chairman points out, we've not had a lot of experience with cyber. So part of this, again, is getting what are we planning against, and then what will we do differently, and if that requires resources, where are those resources coming from?
I also think that we have to be prepared post Sandy or post Iverk, because one of the issues, we still have problems in New Jersey where people are still out of their homes years later. And to me, that's really unacceptable, 2 or 3 years later, that we have these issues with people, with the insurance, with the evaluation of the property. I mean, somehow we have to be prepared for some of these things because it impacts real people.
It does, and our experiences coming out of Hurricane Katrina, 5 years after that, we still have over 5,000 families living in travel trailers because we didn't have the right answers. So rebuilding after disaster is, again, very time-consuming. There's a lot of hurdles to go through, and I agree. It is ideal to get people back in their homes as quickly as possible, but that requires a lot of things that go beyond even some of my programs. It's really, as you point out, state, locals, and feds working as a team.
I'm not just putting the blame on you. I'm also putting this blame on the locals and the state, that we should be prepared for any of these storms or whatever we have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes